Welcome to Home Education Matters, the weekly podcast supporting you on your home education journey. Hello and welcome to another episode of Home Education Matters. And today I'm joined by Amy Neylon, and we are going to be talking about home educating when you have ADHD. So this is if you're a parent with ADHD as opposed to a child with ADHD, but I'm guessing that there'll be some sort of transference as well. So first of all, Amy, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. And do tell us a little bit about your home education journey.
Thank you so much. So I'm Amy. I was a teacher first, so I taught for 12 years overall, and towards the end of that time I had my children, and then I was doing some research and started to think a bit more about home education. And then the pandemic hit just as my daughter was about to be going into reception. And it just seemed like the perfect time, really, to start home educating. We kind of tried really hard to make our jobs work so that one of us could be at home and the other one could be, earning the money and all that kind of thing. And it's been quite a ride so far, but we've been doing it nearly 4 years now, and my son is now 4 and reception age, so he's kind of along for the journey too. And we really enjoy it.
So you're a COVID recruit then? You're one of the tribe that came to us during COVID?
In a way, I think it was coincidental in some ways, because I think I had been thinking about it beforehand, and it just so happened that my daughter became school age at the kind of COVID time. So I don't see myself as a COVID one, but it kind of just conveniently fit in with that, and it just seemed like a really good time to do it.
Do you know, it's interesting you say it like that, because I think there is a sense sometimes in home education that people that came to home education through COVID are, I don't know, like sneaking in the back door or something like that. But I think COVID was wonderful for showing parents the option that they maybe didn't know was there, and just opening up everyone's eyes to the possibility that there was this thing that actually was legitimate and actually was kind of a good choice. And oh, look, everyone enjoys it. And I love COVID recruits. I'm like, all for them, bring them on.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah, I probably didn't. I probably made it sound like I was being disparaging of people who had come during COVID, but it was just. I think it felt like it was just happening during that time, and I really loved that kind of, because my daughter was in a school nursery, so that kind of stopped in the March, and that kind of, I suppose, did give us a bit of a taste in a way of like what it could be like. And I think that we've got really happy memories of that time when we were all at home and everybody kind of had to find things to do, and we were going out walking for our 1 hour a day, and all those sorts of things. Like it was quite a special time for us. I know it was not good for everybody, but for us we've got really happy memories of that, and in some ways that gave us a really good introduction into actual home education when it started.
Do you know, if I had a pound for every person who had said to me that they really enjoyed the COVID lockdowns, so many people found it a really beautiful thing. And I think part of it was that we were in these close family units. So I think, we were all spending time together. And I think quite often over the years, when I say I home educate, people tend to, the most common response is that they could never spend that much time with their children. They'd like all hate each other, or oh my God, we would get on so badly, or we would all argue. But actually, I think during COVID, we all learned that actually that's not the case. And actually, we all rather quite like our families and sort of get on with each other. And I think it was rather a beautiful time. In actual fact, I don't know, maybe it was like a simpler time, or a time where we felt that we were paired back to basics in some way. But I know that a lot of people found that a really wholesome time and a really connecting time.
Yeah, I think it was simpler in some ways. I think a lot of people were on furlough, weren't they? So we didn't have that kind of job stress as much. And again, some people did have that. They were trying to work from home and educate their children with works being sent from school and all that kind of thing. So that was particularly stressful for some people. But because I was on furlough, my wife was on furlough, we had little children and we didn't have to think about anything else apart from what we were going to do together that day. It was almost like a really extended holiday, which felt really nice.
So I always ask this of all the teachers who come on, the teachers who are now home educating, and I always ask them the same question, which is, what made you as a teacher decide that you wanted to home educate your children? Because I think it's always fascinating for the general public to see that. It's almost like you kind of came over to the dark side, or maybe you left the dark side and came over to the light side.
Oh, I wonder which way it was. Yeah, it's a really interesting question. When I was really considering it, I was working in a nursery that was attached to a school in it was quite a disadvantaged area of Liverpool, and it was just really interesting observing the children that were coming into the nursery and the kind of skills that those children had or didn't have. And I wasn't sure, I don't know, I think from my perspective, it felt like the impact of school and that kind of schooled idea of sitting down and concentrating for extended periods of time and that kind of thing, I didn't think it was helping those children to develop the skills I knew they needed. And things like risk awareness, because in a nursery they did have an outside area, but they didn't seem to have that awareness of each other and how to cooperate, how to interact with resources well. And in my perspective, and some people would see the same situation and maybe get a different perspective, but I felt that I could do better for my children. But I know that is a very privileged way of thinking as well, because if you're in that situation where you're living in a deprived area, or you're you're struggling financially, home education might not be the right choice for you. So yeah, but at the time, in my mind, I felt that if those children were in a woodland somewhere and they could have that freedom a bit more, or if they had more choices over what they were doing rather than being directed all the time, I think that's part of it. So rather than a teacher constantly telling them, this is what you do next, this is what you do next, and structuring your day so well, if they had a bit more control, whether that would support them better than what was being provided. And I'm not speaking negatively to schools and teachers, because they were dealing with, difficult environments in the school was falling down pretty much, and the outdoor space was really small, and, all these kind of things. They didn't have huge amounts of resources, which, lots of schools are dealing with those problems. And I don't know, I just felt that in that moment, when I was already thinking about home educating, it felt like I could do better. And that was just how I felt at the time. I think my thinking has developed probably more since then. And I don't necessarily feel like school is as big a problem as maybe I did at the time. I feel like I've probably talked myself around in circles there.
No, that's really interesting, because I think that most home educators, I mean, maybe I'm wrong about this, but I feel like most home educators actually become more anti-school as they go on. And although I suppose a lot of home educators take their children out of school and are quite annoyed with the school system when they do that, but I find that home educators become a little bit more entrenched in their home education is great and school is bad kind of standpoint as they go through it. I know from my perspective, I had no beef at all with school when I just fell into home education. We were abroad. It just fitted really nicely for us. And then we just carried on. And then I just had no inclination to put them in school. I kind of liked the freedom of going away when I wanted. I had no problem with the school system. And it's really only in the last 5 years or so that I've actually started to become really quite critical of the school system and actually thinking, there's something fundamentally wrong with the school system. And I know we did a podcast with, we've actually done a couple of podcasts with Naomi Fisher, who wrote the Big Unschooling book, Changing Our Minds. And I did a podcast with her about anxiety and children in school, and how the school system is inherently designed to feed a child's anxiety. And it was really an eye-opening podcast for me, because I think it
Mm.
really made me realize that I think sometimes we pussyfoot around the school system when we home educate. We kind of don't want to be too critical of it. We kind of want to say, oh, well, actually, it's okay and it's not too bad, and like it's up to everybody to make their choice, which it is, of course. But I think sometimes it takes somebody like Naomi to come out and say, well, actually, no, it is fundamentally bad. And that's why we're home educating, because I think sometimes we can be really scared of putting of feeling like we're criticizing school parents.
Mm.
And I'm never criticizing school parents. I'm criticizing the school system. And some
Yeah.
parents have to have their child in the school system. And we have our children out of the school system, which allows us to have this perspective looking in, which is actually like, this is fundamentally broken. And I think a lot of
Mm.
parents of schooled children would probably sympathize and say, yes, it is actually fundamentally broken.
Yes. Yeah, I really like Naomi Fisher, and I've read a lot of her things and listened to a lot of her things, and I do agree with almost everything she says. And I'm not even criticizing anything she says, but I don't know. I think my perspective has kind of gone a bit of a pendulum. So obviously, I was in the school system for most of my life for quite a long time. So I was on one end where I was kind of pro school. I thought school was really necessary, etc., etc. And then I think my pendulum kind of swung the other way, and I felt really quite anti-school, and I felt like, yeah, I understood all the reasons why school was bad for children, and as it was why it was a negative. And I think as I've kind of learned more, and actually my wife has actually gone back into teaching quite recently and things like that, I think I've kind of come slightly closer to the middle of thinking kind of from this perspective of parents who go send their children to school and why they do that, and from this perspective of parents of children where children have a really good time at school, and also the fact that certain elements of the system are necessary, not because teachers want it that way, but just because they are dealing with a situation that it means that is necessary, if you see what I mean.
For example?
So, for example, things like walking silently in corridors, and that necessity to not have children talking to each other all the time. And because you've got like potentially 400 children within a small space, why quiet is necessary throughout the day. And, I'm critical of that, because we talk, home educators are always people saying, why don't they get to socialize and all that sort of thing? And that is not necessarily good for children, but it is necessary in that environment. Or, like, for example, the fact that children do so much writing and so much work in books and that kind of thing. And the idea that, if it's one teacher, sometimes you're lucky enough to have a TA these days. It's not always guaranteed. With 30 children, that is the only way that you're going to understand what they've been thinking, how well they've understood what's going on, that sort of thing. So yeah, I kind of understand why things are done that way, and I'm not necessarily critical of teachers as much anymore as maybe I possibly admit that I have been in the past. Yeah, so I'm kind of torn a bit more now.
Every teacher I've ever met is desperately trying to do their very best for the pupils in the worst possible environment that they can do that. They're desperately trying to put the children first and can't. They're desperately trying to put education first and can't. They're desperately trying to include everybody and be inclusive, and they can't be. They're desperately trying to be empathetic and compassionate, and they can't be. And I think exactly what you were saying just there is a really good example of exactly why the school system is broken, because what is best for the child is cannot be accommodated within the current school system, because there's 30 children or 300 children in a corridor, and unfortunately, realistically, you can't allow every child's needs to be met, and that is part of the system. However, I feel like I could really easily talk about this for the rest of our podcast, and I really want to, but I'm going because I've actually never done a podcast where I kind of rant about the school system. So maybe that one is looming before I finish my
Maybe
podcast.
that's another one.
But for now, let us talk about ADHD. So
Okay.
I am what I like to call neurodull. Because I'm just very neuro vanilla. So
Okay.
but as a life coach and a therapist, I work with a lot of people with ADHD and a lot of autistic clients. And I find that my ADHD clients really struggle with embracing their diagnosis. And a lot of them come to me because they've just been diagnosed or self-diagnosed, and they're really struggling to see positives in their diagnosis. And so today, we are going to be talking about some of the challenges of
Mhm.
home educating with ADHD and also some of the bonuses of being an ADHD home educator. So, Amy, first of all, tell us a little bit about your perspective and your insight on home educating with ADHD.
Okay, so I don't have an official diagnosis at this point, and I feel like I'm still. It's almost like a bit of courage. I'm having to build up the idea of trying to talk to a doctor about that. Um, so yeah, that's probably another story for another time. But in the past couple of years, both of my brothers have been diagnosed, and it was through one of my brothers being diagnosed and talking to him and reading some of the information that he got about some of the criteria, but also some of the criteria about ADHD in women, talking that through with my parents and them saying, gosh, you've got quite a few of these things. This sounds like you. And then I kind of dismissing it and thinking, oh no, and all that sort of thing. And then after a while, sometimes people are critical of the idea of like looking on social media about diagnosing yourself with these things. But, when you're watching some things and thinking, gosh, that's really me, and, feeling that validation almost, and looking back on my life and realizing that some of those things that I thought was just a character flaw and something that was wrong with me, that if I was better, I'd do better at it. Like, those sorts of things were actually just difficulties that people with ADHD have. And that helped me hugely, even without a doctor saying that I definitely had it. It just helped me to feel like it's not just me. And actually, the next thing that it helped me with is there's actually things I can do to make it easier for myself. Because I always thought I just need to keep doing the methods that other people suggest to me, or, the system that's put in place for you. And if I did it long enough, I'd get there. When actually somebody who thinks differently and has a slightly different brain, chemistry or whatever it's called, there are different strategies that are going to help you. And I found that really helpful. And I do find that really helpful now, to think, right, well, let's not think about what works for most people, but just think about what works best for me, and keeping trying things and retrying things. And it stopped me from the kind of shame of thinking I'm just not very good at these things, but thinking actually I've just not found the strategy that works best for me yet. And I think that has really helped my self-confidence and all that kind of thing.
That's really helpful. So before we talk about the specific strategies that you have found useful that are designed sort of bespoke for ADHD parents as opposed to just neuronormative home educating parents, what would you say were the main symptoms that you noticed in yourself that made you think, okay, I think this is perhaps what I've got?
Okay. So one of the biggest things for me is the kind of being able to distinguish and prioritize what to do first. So I've always got a list of, in my head, a list of, I don't know, it feels like 1,000 things, but, lots of things that I want to either be achieving or to do in the day. And it takes me a really long time to decide. It would be much easier if I just wrote a list and tried to work through the list. I'd be trying to do it mentally constantly. And that then gets me overwhelmed, and sometimes I just freeze and I can't do anything, and I'll sometimes just be in that sort of freeze mode of I've got so many things to do, what do I do? And I feel exhausted before I even started. So I think that's called executive function. I think like trying to decide what to do and how to do it the best way, prioritizing. So sometimes I will decide what I think I can achieve in the moment to get myself started. And sometimes other people are saying, why are you choosing that thing first when this could be the priority? I find it hard to choose which thing is the best thing to prioritize first. So I will choose the thing that will help me feel like I've achieved something rather than the thing that is probably most pressing, and it would be good if that got done first. So that's one of my biggest symptoms that I've kind of noticed. One of the positives that is kind of something that has always been part of me is my ability to, in a crisis, being able to decide, like if it's a crisis moment, I can really pinpoint straight away what I need to do to help. So if somebody is injured or something is happening, and if people around me are panicking, I just seem to naturally be able to step in and do that thing. So like, for example, when I was teaching, there was a child who had his finger stuck in the radiator. He'd been playing with his finger in the radiator while I'd been queuing up for lunch and got his finger stuck. And lots of people were around trying to work out what to do. And then I just I just went in and just decided. I asked for an ice pack. I just chatted to him and I just sorted it through. And within a couple of minutes, his finger was out, and he went over to get sorted. And I think it surprises me because in most situations I can't decide what to do, but if it's vital that I make a decision, I seem to be able to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't realize that was an ADHD quirk. That's interesting.
Well, when I saw something on Instagram of somebody saying about in a crisis they can decide exactly what to do, I thought, gosh, that's so, like, that was something that I thought it was just about me. I didn't realize that was an ADHD symptom. So yeah, that's a funny one. I'm trying to think of there's. It feels like when I see them, there's loads of things, but trying to actually say them, I forget.
What about when you're home educating? Do you find that you have any particular challenges when it comes to home educating because of your ADHD? And also, on the flip side, do you find that there are any particular things that you absolutely ace because of your ADHD when you're home educating?
Yeah, so sometimes I think I struggle at first. When I first started home educating, I was really into the unschooling idea. So I was really, I came really anti-routine, anti-structure, and really like children do best when they're given, lots of opportunities and they get to just choose and flow through the day and, all that sort of thing. But it was actually only a couple of years ago, possibly even when I started thinking about ADHD, where I started to realize that actually a bit of routine and something I don't have to make a decision about all the time actually helps me quite a lot. So thinking on this day I do this, and those things start to happen without having to decide all the time. So that decision fatigue I find I really struggle with. So yeah, so sometimes like I'll forget about meal times occasionally, so they'll occasionally be a bit later than they need to be, and I will sometimes get really engrossed in something, a project that we're doing together or something else, and I realise that I should have moved on to the next thing, but I've stuck with that because I've just been so engrossed in it. So I sometimes, I struggle with those sorts of things. Some things I kind of worry about admitting. Like I had to become really strict with myself about making sure I got dressed in the morning. So if I get dressed as soon as I wake up, then I'm done for the day. Whereas if I think, right, I'll do this first and then I'll do this, I'll get into all kinds of other jobs, and then it gets to midday and I'm still not dressed. And I find it's just prioritizing those activities can be quite difficult, which is why, like, yeah, I've kind of, I always think to myself, if I can just do one thing, then it hopefully will lead to the next thing, even if it's not, um, even if it's not the thing to prioritize or the thing I was aiming to do. If I can just do one thing, it can help move me forward rather than dithering over what should I do, I'm not sure what to do next. And being in that loop of what do I do, I kind of take a deep breath, choose something, and then that kind of leads me forward a bit better.
Choosing that one thing kind of breaks that stalemate almost and allows you to go from a slight frozen state into an activity, even if it's not necessarily the one that you needed to be doing or wanted to be doing, but that then flows to the next one and the next one and the next one.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. So going on from the things that I struggle with, if I move into kind of how I've made things work for myself better, like I was saying about having some structure, so not having a kind of you've got to do this, then this, then this in the day, but having on Mondays we do these two activities. Tuesdays we do these two activities, Wednesday, and having just a couple of things each day. That it works really well if I don't have to plan them every week and decide what we're going to do. And it works really well if I've got all the things I need for those activities, if I have them ready. So having a bit of prep beforehand, which I don't always do, but when I do, it works better.
And this is fascinating because actually what you're describing is exactly the kind of techniques that my adult ADHD clients talk about, the ones that aren't home educating. So they talk about
Okay.
making sure their clothes are laid out the night before, making sure that if they want to do their meditation first thing, that is the easiest and first thing that they do. They put it next to the kettle, for example, or they put a note, or they make sure that if they want to do something, it's very easy and accessible for them to do because it's kind of laid out in advance. And it sounds like you've taken those techniques and applied them to your home education journey.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've done. So I listened to an audiobook called Atomic Habits by James Clear.
Yes.
Yeah. Yes. And that's changed everything for me. And it just it was a bit of a light bulb moment, really, of like, oh, I can actually do something to help myself. I don't have to just kind of aimlessly go through my day and hope that something happens that feels really good. I can actually structure those things in and make them happen, because I find that my children will always find something to do. I don't need to worry about them as much. They will always, they're developing skills and they're doing all kinds of things. And we have the art table available and we have their toys available and all that kind of thing. So if I don't input with them, or if I just join them in what they're doing, they've always found something to do. They seem to be, so much research shows that children are natural self-directed learners. They are, that is true as far as I've seen from my children. They can choose what to do, whereas I want to feel like I have given them some input as well in the day. I like to give lots of time for play, but I also like to give some direction. And even if it's for a short amount of time, or if I'm just playing things that they're playing. But I find I do that better and I feel better about it when I've done some things to help myself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that actually, because do you find that because of your ADHD, you need to factor in respite time, almost like downtime, because otherwise you would just go and go and go all day? Or do you find that actually it's getting going is the issue rather than stopping going?
Well, something else that I've learnt over time, and something else I was talking to you before about some business training that I've done, is thinking about monthly cycles rather than daily cycles. So thinking about us as women being kind of thinking about our, how would you word it, our menstrual cycle, and the idea that you have a kind of the seasons throughout the month. And when you're in that winter time, making the time to say, I'm not going to do as many things this time, or we're going to really make sure that we're doing more downtime activities, that helps me throughout the rest of the month, I find. Because I think I'd either go and go and go and then completely burn out and feel really awful about the fact that I didn't get the things done that I wanted to, or occasionally I'd struggle to get started. And I think I just found that making that time once a month of having a few days where we just purposefully didn't do that much, it just made the rest of the month flow better.
I agree. And I think that for a lot of my ADHD clients, they are the most switched on when it comes to their luteal phase, for example, and their ovulation phase. They know exactly where they are in their monthly cycle, and they know to adapt to their sort of the changes in their hormones. And it sounds like for you, you're able to take that monthly approach and apply it to how you structure your home education days, so that towards the end of your monthly cycle, you may be booking less in, having less pressure on lessons. And then when you're in the first couple of weeks where you're feeling much more energized, you then adapt accordingly.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So it's almost kind of structure, but a flexible structure. So like on a Monday, we'd often go swimming, but then sometimes if we feel like it's a down week, then we won't go swimming that week, but I know that we can pick it up next week. So, it's kind of structure, but with flexibility. And I think that works best for me and for us as a family as well.
And I think being able to greet that with compassion as well, to sort of say it's okay that, for this week we're not going swimming, and that's okay. It's okay to do that, because I think quite often as home educating parents, we drive ourselves mad with guilt about if we're doing enough, or are people going to judge our children for not doing this or not doing that. And I think that self-compassion on your home education journey is probably the single most important thing that you can have.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I am quite hard on myself naturally as a person anyway. So sometimes I'll get to the end of a day and I'll think, gosh, we didn't do the things that I'd planned. And I feel like I've done nothing very good. And I feel like this and I feel like that. But then actually I've started doing a done list. So I've started thinking, well, if I sit down and think about it, we did some baking together and we played. I'm just thinking about today, because today things kind of didn't go how I'd wanted, and we played top trumps together, and we did an exercise thing with the TV, and we did some playing together, and we did this and we did that. But actually, if I get to the end of the day, I got to the end of the day thinking I've not done anything. But if I can think about it, there were lots of things I actually did do, even if they weren't what we'd planned.
Yeah, I think that these celebration lists or achievement lists are a really helpful way as well to remind our brain that we're actually doing all these good things. And then it encourages our brain with this confirmation bias to just start looking out for these things, so that every single day we do a list like that, every day gets a little easier, because our brain is flagging this up, because it knows that we're going to be asking it at the end of the day, okay, what are these great things I've done today? So our brain tends to, it's just like when you go on car journeys and you're like, okay, spot red cars, and you see red cars everywhere. If you say to our brain, okay, spot the wins, and then it suddenly sees wins everywhere, it's rather wonderful.
Yeah.
So what other strategies have you got in place? You've mentioned that you like to have a routine to a degree, and that you'd like to match your routine a little bit to your monthly cycle and your energy levels. And then you like to do habit stacking. So this is the idea that, when you do this, you're going to do this. So, and if you want to have a habit, you put your clothes out so that they're easy and accessible, for example. And then you mentioned about having a done list, a list where you're like ticking things off and being like, yeah, I've done all that. What other strategies have you found help your ADHD brain?
So other things that help me. So you're talking about the habit stacking. So one of the things that I really like to do is things like if we've been out somewhere, as soon as we get home, I like to do something together. So I'll get a book, and sometimes the children don't want to come and listen, so I'll just go and sit with them while they're playing, and I'll just read with them. Or, you know, if you think about your bedtime routine, you'll always read, you'll always do this, you'll always do a chat or whatever, however you do it. Those sorts of things just become easier because they're done in a certain order, or they're done after the thing that you've done before that you were going to do anyway. So yeah, that's habit stacking. I really like it. I'm just trying to think of other things that really help me. So I often come into a situation, so I work from home as well, so I work at my laptop for 3 hours a day, and during that time, but I don't do it all at once, so I'll do it bits of time. So I'll leave the children doing something, or they'll do something near me while I'm working, but as soon as I get up, I want to do something with them. And sometimes I again get in freeze mode of like, what could I do? So I'll have an idea and then think I've not got the resources, and I've not got this, and where will I get this from, and blah blah blah, and I'll talk myself out of doing the thing that I was going to do. So then again, it's just having that clarity of not letting myself get into that sort of talk spiral of, you can't do that, it won't work because of this, it won't work because of this, and just thinking, right, what's one thing I could do right now? And usually it's having a few things that don't require any resources. Often it's things that are a bit high energy and are going to get each other giggling, or we're going to get something going on that helps us just get our mood raised. Because I don't know if I'm like anyone else, but after I'm working, I often feel a bit like sluggish and lethargic, and I've been staring at my laptop for too long, and I need to get my body moving. But also it kind of reconnects me with my children, and then from that I'll then think, right, well, we can do this next, and it clarifies things a bit for me. So I suppose that kind of is habit stacking in a way, but it's just trying to boost my, I don't know, is it dopamine people talk about these days? Like, I'm just lifting us and getting us energized for the next part of the day and the next thing that we're going to do. So I find that really helps me.
So kind of like activities that are joyful and joy-based, and you like to scatter those throughout your day?
Yes, yeah, definitely.
Very beautiful.
Yeah, I sometimes find that I can get stuck in not wanting to do them for a bit too long. But whenever I think to myself, right, what can I do to get myself out of it? They are always activities I come back to. And we do end up doing a few a day. And it does really help us to keep things going. I also find as well, and I think it might be an ADHD issue, is that if I plan too many activities, or I plan activities to be done at a certain time in the day or a certain day of the week, I can get to them and not want to do them. So like I might have a maths activity planned and a something I was going to do, and sometimes it gets to it and I think it's not going to work. But I don't know if I can explain this right. If it's just a little idea at the back of my mind and I can think to myself, oh, this is a good time to do it, I find that much easier than saying at 10 o'clock on Tuesday, I'm going to do this activity. It might be that maths activity that I'd planned ends up happening at Thursday at 4 o'clock. It's having things I can pull out of my memory, or pull out of the cupboard, or somewhere visual, somewhere like a trolley, like a art trolley. So I've got it just to grab whenever I feel like it's a good time. I find that much better than trying to do something at a certain time, because when I get to it, I think, oh, it's not the right time. The children are playing something and it doesn't quite work there. And I talk myself out of it again. But it then gets done another time. Does that make sense?
It does. And so I'm guessing that that in some ways that alleviates the pressure of thinking, okay, well, now it's 4 o'clock on a Thursday, so we've got to do this mass activity regardless of how everyone's feeling. So within your need for routine, you also have a need for flexibility.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. yeah, I think that works. That explains it really well. So, like I say, I have a couple of things planned in a day, but I don't have too many things planned in a day. So I don't say we have to do a maths activity then an English activity. I might say that we have them planned, but we do them when they suit. Does that make sense?
It does. Are there any other strategies or approaches that you have found have helped you?
Talking to you and thinking about it, I think my main things that I do, so my main principles are the routine aspect, thinking about the next thing, so thinking of one thing I can do to help things, and then it's also that connection, bringing that connection back with my children, and that seems to help things flow much better. And getting those things right really helps. And then another thing is decluttering and tidying up. And I say that because I'm not excellent at it, but when I probably once a month go through everything and sort out the art cupboard and sort out the books and sort out all the things, because if my space isn't helpful, then it's not helpful.
Do you know, I think that's something that I've never heard anyone else say, and that really resonates with me because
Mm-hmm.
I've world schooled, which means I've homeschooled in like all sorts of different countries and all sorts of different scenarios and environments. And the times when it has gone best, I don't just mean individual days, but I mean months and months on end, have been the
Yeah.
times when I've felt that I've had an environment around me that has felt open and clear. Maybe I've got a nice view out of the window. And the times when it hasn't gone well is when I felt a little bit claustrophobic, or I felt like I haven't got a lot of space, or I'm feeling everything feels a bit on top of me. And I realized quite early on that environment really makes a difference for my homeschooling. Like if I don't have the right environment, like kind of vibe, if I don't have the right vibe, my lessons didn't go well and nobody
Yeah.
really enjoyed themselves and it was all a bit of a mess. So I'm really glad you said that, because I've found that has made a big difference to me as well.
Yeah, I find that's really important. And I'm not amazing at tidying up, but something that I've started doing is having a basket of where I can just dump the things that I'm not quite sure where they go. Because sometimes I'll just leave them there thinking I'll figure out what to do with that later. But they just stay and they kind of become wallpaper and I forget about them. And it just kind of adds to the clutter. And then I start to realize that it is affecting how easily my days go because there's just stuff everywhere. So if I can tidy up most things and if they can go away really easily, then that's great. But the things that I'm not sure what to do with, I'll dither over for ages. So if I can just put them in a basket, I'm not sure yet what I do with the stuff when they get in the basket, but I find it helps for things to feel a bit tidier. I'm hoping what I'll do is I'll eventually find somewhere for them, but I suppose we'll see.
I used to have a system and still have a system, although my two are now a little bit older, but I used to have a system where I used to have an like kind of in tray kind of thing, you know, like one of those wire baskets. And
Okay.
I would put the papers that any papers I always seem to have a million bits of paper, like printouts and exercise books and you name it. And I put them in there. And then the best thing I ever bought for my home education journey, apart from a box set of Little Miss books when I was in Egypt that taught both my children how to read, apart from that,
Mhm.
the best thing I bought was colored box files, you know, the A4 box files. I bought, I think, maybe 10 of them in really bright colors. They cost me £95. It was quite outrageous, but it was a really, really good investment. And I had one of those IKEA Billy bookcases that they fit
Mm.
in, one of those like mini ones. And I put all my box files, beautiful colors, so they made me feel joyous just looking at them. And I would put labels on them. So one would have my daughter's name and maths, and one would have my son's name and English. And whatever age they were, I would just take the labels off and change them. And then any papers in my wire basket, once a week, I would go through them and put them all in their boxes. And I found that was just one of those things where it allowed me to keep my space clear and I made me feel like strangely on it. You know, like, oh, I've got this, I've got my colored box files. Even
I
though
can imagine it's very
realistically,
satisfying.
oh my God, it was super satisfying. And
Yeah.
realistically, you know, most of us and most people listening to this are going to be home educating parents who are at home with their children all day, and they maybe don't work, and they maybe don't, get to go out as much as they'd like. And we have to find our joy in these little things. And for me, my brightly colored box files were very much a moment of joy for me every week.
That's such a good idea. I think, yeah, I might take that one. Maybe use that for myself. That's a really good idea.
So tell us, before we finish, tell us, what do you think is the biggest bonus of having an ADHD brain when it comes to home educating? What is the big one thing that you're like, wow, this is a superpower for home education?
Well, that's a good question. Superpower. Well, I would say something. Well, it's something that I've kind of discovered more recently in a way, because I don't know whether some of my experience of school turned me off it in a way, but I think it's made me a really good problem solver. So that's a kind of way, I suppose, of being creative. I always thought of myself as not a creative person at all, but I think over time I've just been able to see a problem, find a solution, see if that works or not, try again. And I think, I'm not certain that that is a part of ADHD, but I think that that is something that I think is a good thing, and I think it really helps me as part of home educating as well.
I think it is. And I think that one thing I've noticed with my clients is that this slightly fragmented brain, for want of a better way, and I don't mean that in any kind of a critical way, but that, where you're thinking this, thinking that, thinking this, thinking that, and it can be difficult to pursue or make a decision, pursue a different particular choice or make a decision. That actually makes you brilliant at pivoting. You're like fabulous at pivoting from one thing to another. And I think that's what you're saying there, is that when it comes to problem solving, you're like, try this. Oh, not working. Try this. Oh, not working. Try that. And I think that is just amazing. And I look at my clients who are able to do that, and I'm like, that is brilliant. I wish I could pivot that quickly. I think it's fabulous. So I totally see why that is useful in home education, because I think that ability to be able to respond to what's going on around you and then pivot and change, and pivot and change, I think is brilliant. Okay, so Amy, I know you're working really hard. To support the home education community. So do you want to tell us a little bit about where other home educators can interact with you? I think you've got an Instagram account, and I know you're working hard to kind of to just share your advice and give guidance to the home education community.
Yeah, so my Instagram account is do one good thing. So that's really related to what we've been talking about today, of just, if you're feeling overwhelmed and you feel like you're not sure where to start, just doing one good thing can often lead to the next thing, or can just get you started, and that can be a great place to start. So that is my Instagram account. And then I've also got Do One Good Thing, which is on Facebook as well. I'm hoping to move on to TikTok eventually, but I've not quite got around to that yet. And yeah, those are the main places to find me. And it is just about helping to celebrate, but also problem solve when you're trying to get going, or, like you say, pivot on your home education journey.
That's fabulous. Well, Amy, thank you so much for talking us through that, and for being so open and so so kind of so authentic in the way you've come on the podcast and talked about your ADHD journey. So thank you so much, Amy. It's been lovely having you on.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us for today's Home Education Matters podcast. See you at the next one. Have a lovely day.